The summer air hung thick over Maycomb, a slow, suffocating heat that seemed to infect the hearts of its people. From the cracked sidewalks to the peeling paint on the courthouse, everything looked worn, tired. As if the town itself was bracing for a storm, it knew it couldn't survive. Scout Finch, barefoot and curious as ever, watched from the front porch as her father, Atticus Finch, buttoned up his best suit and tightened his thin, worn tie. She had never seen him look quite like this. Not stern exactly, but distant, as if he were preparing for a battle he knew he might not win. Word of the trial had spread like wildfire. Tom Robinson, a black man from the outskirts of town, had been accused of assaulting Mayella Ewell, the lonely daughter of one of Maycomb's poorest, most despised families. It didn't matter that no evidence truly pointed to Tom. It didn't matter that Mayella's story changed with every telling. In Maycomb, accusations from white lips were heavier than truth. As Atticus walked to the courthouse that morning, the town seemed to split at his heels. On one side, faces turned cold and hard, women clutching their children closer, men spitting tobacco into the dirt in disgust. On the other, a few nodded silently, their eyes betraying quiet support they dared not voice aloud. Scout and her brother, Jem, sat in the colored balcony, high above the courtroom floor, squeezed between Reverend Sykes and a row of townsfolk who smelled of soap and worry. The courtroom itself was a living thing, breathing tension with every creak of the wooden pews and every murmur that rose like static before being smothered by the judge's gavel. Atticus stood alone in that room, his voice clear and steady, unraveling the case piece by piece with a surgeon's precision. He spoke of evidence, of facts, but the faces below him told another story. Fear, anger, guilt. Bob Ewell, sitting with a smug grin, played to the crowd with every sneer and sideways glance. Mayella, pale and trembling, cast her eyes downward, clutching a handkerchief with knuckles gone white. Scout gripped Jem's hand tightly as Atticus spoke. She could feel her brother's anger simmering just beneath his skin, but Atticus's words were calm, measured, almost heartbreakingly so. He wasn't just defending Tom Robinson. He was defending Maycomb's soul, though most were too blind to see it. When Tom Robinson took the stand, the room shifted uneasily. His voice was soft, respectful, but there was a strength behind it that Scout noticed. The strength of a man who knew he was telling the truth, but also knew truth alone would never be enough. Outside the courthouse, mobs gathered. Neighbors whispered. Former friends crossed the street to avoid the Finches. The trial had become more than a case. It had become a symbol, a tearing wound that exposed every rot and resentment buried in the town's heart. As the first day of testimony closed, Scout sat quietly beside Jem, feeling a strange new heaviness settle over her. Childhood, once a safe and sunlit thing, now seemed distant, a door swinging shut behind her. In Maycomb, innocence was not just lost, it was put on trial, every single day. And the real verdict, Scout realized with a shiver, had already been passed long before Atticus ever spoke a word. Act Chapter 2. The Secret Society of Shadows. At first, Scout thought it was just another of Dill's wild tales, whispers of a secret group moving through Maycomb under the cover of night, plotting against the town's uglier instincts. But as the trial dragged on and tensions grew thick enough to taste, Scout began noticing things she couldn't explain. Mysterious figures would gather in the twilight near the back doors of certain homes. Notes were passed in hymnals at Sunday service, hidden between the pages of sacred songs. Hushed conversations fell silent when Scout or Jem walked by, only to resume in furtive glances and hurried footsteps. The children's first real clue came from Calpurnia. One evening, after the house grew dark and the crickets sang their nightly song, Scout caught her slipping a sealed envelope into her apron. When Calpurnia thought no one was watching, she stepped out into the heavy night air and disappeared down the road, her figure swallowed by the misty dark. Curious and wary, Scout and Jem followed. They stayed far enough back that even Calpurnia's keen senses didn't detect them. Through the trees and across the edge of town, they watched as she knocked 3 times, soft but certain, on the rear door of the First Purchase Church. Inside, a small gathering of Maycomb's black community and a few white faces Scout recognized from the fringes of town met in a circle of candlelight. Reverend Sykes was there, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Beside him, Miss Maudie Atkinson, her face usually alight with mirth, now wore a look of fierce determination. "We can't fight them out in the open," Reverend Sykes said, voice low but resolute. "But we can fight in the ways that count." Scout could barely believe her eyes. Miss Maudie? Calpurnia? Some of the very people Scout thought had stayed silent were planning something. It was a society stitched together out of hope and necessity, a rebellion built not on weapons, but on whispered truths, hidden evidence, and secret alliances. They called themselves the Society of Shadows, a name spoken like a prayer, a vow to act where open defiance would mean death. Their mission was clear: protect Tom Robinson, protect Atticus Finch, and protect the sliver of hope that Maycomb might one day be better than its worst self. But secrecy was a dangerous game. Even one wrong word, one unguarded glance, could tear their fragile network apart. And lurking among them, Scout noticed, was a face that made her stomach twist. Someone she thought she could trust. Someone who, if Scout's instincts were right, might already be planning to betray them all. Scout and Jem slipped home before Calpurnia returned. But that night, Scout couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the lonely sound of the train wailing in the distance, wondering how many good people were hiding behind closed doors and how many monsters walked free in the daylight. Maycomb wasn't just a town anymore. It was a battlefield, and most of the soldiers didn't even know they were at war. Chapter 3: Boo Radley's Dark Past Revealed. For years, Boo Radley had lived only in the imaginations of Maycomb's children, a phantom stitched together from rumors and fevered whispers. Scout had always pictured him as some monstrous figure, pale as bone, with teeth sharp enough to slice through wire, and eyes that glowed in the dark. But after what Scout and Jem had witnessed with the Society of Shadows, the world didn't seem so simple anymore. Monsters wore friendly faces, heroes hid in the shadows, and Boo Radley, it turned out, was not the creature they had believed him to be. It was Miss Maudie who first hinted at the truth. One humid afternoon, as Scout helped her rescue prized azaleas from an incoming storm, Miss Maudie spoke almost casually, as if tossing breadcrumbs along a path she knew Scout would follow. "People in this town needed someone to be afraid of," she said, pushing her wide-brimmed hat back from her forehead. "And Arthur Radley, Boo, made an easy target. But things aren't always what they seem, Scout." Later that night, curiosity gnawed at Scout until she couldn't bear it anymore. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed to Atticus's study, where she found him reading by the dim yellow light of an old lamp. For once, he didn't scold her for being up past bedtime. Quietly, almost reluctantly, Atticus told her the real story. Arthur Radley had once been a bright boy. Shy, yes, but kind-hearted. In his late teens, he fell in with a rough crowd, boys from the far edges of town who saw mischief and rebellion as a way to spit in Maycomb's face. One reckless night, they stole a car, drove it through the town square, and vandalized Mr. Connor's storefront. The sheriff wanted to send them to a juvenile home, but Mr. Radley, Arthur's father, refused. He made a deal. Arthur would stay locked inside the Radley house under his strict, punishing rule. But what was meant as a short-term punishment turned into years of imprisonment. Inside the suffocating walls of that house, Boo became a ghost long before the town forgot he was real. There were rumors of violence, of Arthur stabbing his father with a pair of scissors one desperate afternoon, but even those stories twisted and warped with each retelling. The truth, Atticus said, was far sadder. Boo was more prisoner than predator, more wounded bird than monster. He wasn't dangerous, Atticus said, his voice heavy with something Scout didn't recognize at first. Sorrow. He was just forgotten. Scout sat there long after Atticus's light went out, staring into the shadows and feeling the weight of what she had learned. Boo Radley wasn't a horror story. He was a casualty of a town too proud and too cruel to forgive youthful mistakes. He was a reminder that sometimes the things we fear most are not wickedness or violence, but loneliness and silence. From that night on, Scout never passed the Radley house without feeling a strange ache in her chest, a mix of guilt, curiosity, and something dangerously close to hope. Because in a town full of hidden battles and secret wars, maybe Boo Radley was not the scariest thing at all. Maybe he was one of the... Chapter 4: Betrayal in the Finch Family. Scout always thought the Finch name was a kind of shield, something strong enough to protect her and Jem from the worst the world could throw at them. But in Maycomb, even the purest bonds could be corroded by fear, pride, and old, poisonous blood. The first crack appeared one evening at the dinner table. It started with a knock at the door. Sharp, urgent. When Atticus opened it, Aunt Alexandra stepped in, her silhouette stiff against the porch light. She wore her Sunday best, as if arriving for a church meeting, but her face was set in stone. "We need to talk," she said, without so much as a hello. Scout and Jem were sent to their rooms, but the walls of the Finch house were thin, and their whispers carried like smoke. What Scout pressed her ear to the wood, and listened as her aunt's words unraveled like a thread snagged on a nail. "You have a duty to this family name," Aunt Alexandra hissed. "Defending that man, is tearing us apart. People are talking. They're questioning what kind of Finches we are." Atticus's voice, usually so calm and patient, cracked like dry wood. "The kind that believes in justice, Alexandra. The kind that knows right from wrong, even when it's hard." There was a long silence, a tense, breathless pause where Scout imagined them standing like two soldiers on opposite sides of a battlefield. Then came the words that would burn into Scout's heart forever. "If you continue with this foolishness, you are no brother of mine." Aunt Alexandra's ultimatum hung in the air long after her footsteps faded down the porch steps and into the waiting night. Scout's world tilted, a fault line cracking under her feet. She had thought family meant unconditional loyalty, that blood would stand with blood no matter what. But Maycomb's poison ran deep, even in the Finch line. In the days that followed, the betrayal deepened. Distant cousins who once played with Scout at Christmas now crossed the street to avoid her. Letters came, thin and cruel, tucked between the pages of newspapers left on the porch. Anonymous words dripping with shame. Jem took it harder than Scout. He tried to pretend it didn't matter. But Scout heard him crying behind closed doors when he thought no one was listening. Atticus never spoke of it again, but something in him changed. A sadness settled in his eyes that no amount of smiles or Sunday dinners could chase away. The children learned a terrible truth. Sometimes doing what was right meant standing alone. Sometimes it meant being cast out by the very people who were supposed to love you most. And sometimes, the deepest cuts didn't come from enemies with knives. They came from family with kind faces and cold hearts. Chapter 5: The Disappearance of Jem. It began with a storm. The sky over Maycomb darkened early that evening, thick gray clouds swirling like angry fists. Scout and Jem sat on the front porch, watching the first fat raindrops sizzle into the dust. They had just started arguing over whether the Society of Shadows really existed when Atticus called them inside. Scout thought Jem followed her into the house. She thought she heard the familiar creak of the screen door closing behind her. She thought wrong. By the time she noticed he wasn't there, it was too late. At first, nobody panicked. Jem was adventurous, a boy of restless legs and fearless ideas. Maybe he'd wandered down the street to see Dill. Maybe he was just playing a prank, the kind that would end with him leaping from the bushes to scare her half to death. But night fell, and with it came a creeping dread. Atticus lit the old lantern and led a search through the storm-soaked streets. Neighbors peered from behind lace curtains but shook their heads. The Radley house loomed in the distance, dark and silent. Miss Maudie, Mr. Avery, even Calpurnia joined the search, calling Jem's name into the roaring wind. Nothing. Only the hollow rattle of the storm answered back. Sheriff Tate arrived, his face grim. He didn't say it aloud, but Scout saw the fear flickering in his eyes. This was no ordinary prank. Jem hadn't just wandered off. Something had taken him. The search stretched through the night. They found no footprints, no torn scraps of clothing. Only one clue. Near the tree where Scout and Jem had once found gifts, the tree that stood like a sentinel between the Radleys and Sanctum yard and the road, the mud showed signs of a scuffle, drag marks leading toward the woods. Scout couldn't feel her own heartbeat as she stood there staring. The town's old ghosts stirred. Whispers swept through Maycomb like wildfire. "It's Boo Radley. It's Tom Robinson's friends. It's a warning to Atticus. It's the Society of Shadows." Guilt gnawed at Scout's chest. She thought of every game they had played, every dare they had made about Boo Radley. She thought of secrets they had laughed about, and the warnings Atticus had given them that she had stubbornly ignored. She had always believed Jem was invincible. Now, staring into the endless, hungry dark, Scout realized how small and fragile they all were. In the coming days, Maycomb changed. Smiles vanished. Doors that once stood open were bolted shut. The trial dragged on like a funeral procession, but the heart of the town was somewhere else, out there in the woods, searching for a boy who had once been its brightest light. And somewhere deep down, Scout knew. Finding Jem would mean uncovering truths Maycomb wasn't ready to face. Because in Maycomb, not all monsters lived in haunted houses. Some walked its streets by day, smiling in the sun. Whew! Half Chapter 6. The Courtroom Conspiracy. The trial of Tom Robinson should have been simple. At least, that's what Maycomb believed. Black and white, guilty and innocent, us and them. But as Scout sat with Dill in the upper balcony, the heavy air of the courtroom told a different story. Something was wrong. The room buzzed. Not with anger, but with a strange undercurrent of fear. Men who once laughed loudly now whispered in tight, nervous clusters. Women clutched their handkerchiefs, dabbing at their temples though the air was cool. Scout noticed the first crack when Mr. Gilmer, the prosecutor, fumbled over his opening statement. His hands trembled, his papers out of order. Judge Taylor, usually so sharp and unshakable, kept glancing toward the back of the room, his mouth tightening into a thin line. It wasn't nerves. It was watchfulness. And then there was Bob Ewell. He swaggered to the stand, grinning like a man who already knew the outcome, but when he spoke, his voice cracked in a way that didn't match his words. He kept looking at a small group seated near the back of the room, a knot of men in dark suits who didn't seem to belong to Maycomb at all. Scout leaned closer, straining to hear. She caught only fragments, mentions of agreements, promises made, and one chilling phrase that froze her blood. The Finch boy was just the beginning. Suddenly, the trial wasn't just about Tom Robinson's guilt or innocence. It was about something bigger, a plot stitched into the very fabric of Maycomb, designed to crush anyone who dared challenge the old, rotting ways. Atticus, sensing the shift, grew even more relentless. His cross-examination cut like a knife, exposing lies, half-truths, and gaps in Bob Ewell's testimony. But every answer seemed rehearsed, every outburst carefully timed. It was theater, not justice. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, Judge Taylor called an abrupt recess, claiming health reasons, and cleared the courtroom. Scout clutched Dill's hand tightly. She had seen the flicker of terror in the judge's eyes as he descended from the bench. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a game of survival. When the court reconvened hours later, something had changed. The townsfolk sat straighter. The dark-suited men were gone. But the sense of danger clung to the walls like smoke. Despite the mountain of evidence Atticus presented, despite the clear lies told under oath, the verdict was preordained. Scout could feel it like a stone sinking in her gut. Guilty! The word slammed into the room like a gunshot. Tom's shoulders sagged. Atticus closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing against a blow he had known was coming. As the courtroom emptied, Bob Ewell caught Scout's eye and smirked. A vicious, knowing smile that spoke volumes. The conspiracy wasn't over. It had only just begun. And somewhere in the heart of it was the answer to what had happened to Jem. And what would happen next if the Finches didn't stop. Chapter 7. Boo's Redemption, or Revenge. After the trial, the air in Maycomb turned colder, even as summer clung stubbornly to the trees. It wasn't just the verdict that chilled Scout's bones, it was the feeling of being watched. Every creak of a floorboard, every whisper behind a closed door seemed aimed straight at the Finch family. But nothing unsettled Scout more than the strange signs that started appearing around their house. A small carved doll left on the porch, a torn scrap of Jem's shirt pinned to the oak tree in front yard, a thin, blood-red line painted across their front door one morning before dawn. Atticus, grim and tired, warned them not to jump to conclusions. But Scout knew better. This was a message, and deep in her heart, she knew who it had come from. Boo Radley. The name alone was enough to send a shiver through any child in Maycomb. Scout had spent years imagining Boo, a monstrous figure lurking in the shadows, but now the stories didn't seem so distant. Now Boo felt close. One night, unable to sleep, Scout crept out onto the porch. She sat huddled in her blanket, staring at the Radley house. The shutters were closed, the windows dark. Then, a movement. A pale figure slipping through the trees, silent as a ghost. Scout froze, heart hammering against her ribs. The figure moved toward the house, toward her. Before she could scream, a low voice whispered, "Don't be afraid." Scout blinked. The man before her was not a monster. He was thin, frail, and trembling more from fear than from menace. His eyes, wide, haunted, seemed to plead for understanding. It was Boo. He knelt awkwardly and placed something in her hand, a small, folded note. "I can help you find Jem," it said. Scout wanted to trust him. Wanted to believe that the strange recluse she had feared for so long was, in fact, their unlikely savior. But trust in Maycomb was a dangerous thing. Atticus, upon hearing what happened, sat Scout down and looked at her with an intensity she had never seen before. "Boo Radley," he said slowly, "is not the villain people made him out to be. But that doesn't mean he's free from the darkness Maycomb forced upon him." There were rumors, stories of the Radleys' cruel treatment of Boo, the years he spent locked away, the rage that must have grown like weeds in his heart. Boo had suffered, yes, but suffering could twist a soul as easily as it could save it. Was Boo trying to redeem himself by helping the Finches? Or was he luring them into a trap, driven by years of bitterness and pain? Scout stared out her window that night, the note clutched tightly in her hand. Redemption and revenge wore the same face in Maycomb. And Boo Radley was no longer a story. He was real. And he was waiting. Chapter 8, A Town Divided by Blood. The trial may have ended, but the true battle for Maycomb's soul had only just begun. By the time the leaves turned brittle and the sky grew heavy with storm clouds, the town was no longer just divided by color. It was divided by loyalty, by fear, and by blood. The first blow came silently. Mr. Linkdees, Tom Robinson's employer and one of the few white men to speak on his behalf, was found beaten and left for dead near the courthouse steps. No one claimed to see anything. No one wanted to. Scout overheard the whispers. Some blamed it on the darkies getting restless. Others, quieter, sharper, said it was a warning to anyone who dared challenge the old ways. Lines were drawn down streets that once felt safe. Families who had once shared Sunday dinners now crossed the road to avoid each other. Shopkeepers gave cold stares where smiles used to be. Church pews emptied. Doors slammed shut. And yet, in the heart of the division, a new force stirred. The secret society of shadows, the underground group Atticus had heard rumors about, began working openly, distributing anonymous notes and petitions. Scout glimpsed Mr. Cunningham, the farmer who once led a lynch mob to the jailhouse, handing a folded paper to Miss Maudie in broad daylight. Some stood with Atticus, brave but few. Most stood with Bob Ewell, their pride more powerful than their conscience. Ewell, now drunk on attention, called for the cleansing of Maycomb at every chance he got, spitting his venom into the ears of those willing to listen. And the children. The children felt it most of all. Scout saw it at school. Once, she and Walter Cunningham had shared lunch without a second thought. Now, Walter wouldn't meet her eyes. She caught Mayella Ewell smirking in the hallway as classmates whispered behind their hands. Jem's absence was a wound that refused to heal. Scout could feel it festering in the silence between her and Atticus, in the haunted look in Calpurnia's eyes whenever she passed by Jem's empty room. And as if to underscore the warning, the Finch house was vandalized one night. Broken windows, dead birds nailed to the door. On the porch, a message scrawled in red paint. Justice will be served. Atticus cleaned the mess without a word, but as Scout watched him kneel and scrub the hateful words from their home, she realized her father wasn't just fighting for Tom Robinson anymore. He was fighting for Maycomb's very soul. But Maycomb was bleeding. And blood, once spilled, is not easily forgotten. This chapter shows how hate spreads like... Chapter 9, The Night of Reckoning. The night came heavy and suffocating, like the town itself was holding its breath. Maycomb was a powder keg, and someone had finally lit the fuse. It began with a single scream, sharp, tearing through the thick summer air. Scout jolted awake, heart pounding, as Atticus rushed past her door. Outside, the streets flickered with torchlight and chaos. The courthouse was burning. By the time Scout and Calpurnia reached the square, the building was a mass of black smoke and furious flame. Figures rushed back and forth, some trying to save it, others hurling stones and curses at those who dared. In the flickering firelight, Scout spotted Bob Ewell standing atop the steps, waving a shotgun over his head like a flag. His voice rang out over the crowd. "This is our town. Our blood, our law." Behind him, the secret society of shadows revealed themselves at last. Men and women Scout thought she knew, faces twisted by fury and betrayal. But there were others, too. Neighbors who once hid their sympathies, now stepping forward with grim determination. The town had split wide open. And into this chaos stumbled Boo Radley. He appeared almost by accident, pale and confused in the shifting crowd. People drew back, murmuring his name like a curse. Boo clutched something close to his chest, a worn, bloody scrap of cloth. It was Jem's shirt. Scout broke free from Calpurnia's grasp and ran to him. Boo's hand trembled as he pointed toward the woods behind the Radley house. His message was clear. Jem is alive, but not for long. Before Scout could react, a gunshot split the night. Boo staggered. Blood blossomed across his shoulder, staining his ghostly white shirt crimson. Scout screamed as he collapsed beside her, the crowd hesitating, uncertain whether to help him or let him die. Atticus pushed through the mob, his face carved from stone. He gathered Boo into his arms, lifting him with a strength born of pure will. The look he gave Bob Ewell as he passed him by, cold, unforgiving, promised a reckoning still to come. The fire roared higher, silhouetting the broken courthouse against the sky like a dying beast. Scout felt it in her bones. Maycomb would never be the same. The night of reckoning had come, and not everyone would survive it. Chapter 10. The Final Sacrifice. Dawn broke over Maycomb like a battered soldier, bruised, broken, but alive. The courthouse smoldered in ruins. Ash floated through the air like mocking snowflakes. Scout stood barefoot in the wet grass outside the Radley house, Boo's blood still drying on her hands. Inside, Jem lay motionless, his body bruised and battered but alive. Barely. The secret society of shadows had hidden him there, protecting him from Bob Ewell's growing madness. But now that protection came at a cost. Sheriff Tate arrived first, his uniform torn and his face grim. Behind him came the town. All of them. Some still clung to their hate, others shaken by the violence of the night before. The old Maycomb was dead. What rose in its place would be decided here and now. Bob Ewell swaggered forward, bruised and drunk, shotgun in hand. He pointed it squarely at Boo Radley, slumped weakly against the porch rail, barely able to lift his head. "This is your fault," Ewell spat, eyes wild. "All of it." Scout stepped between them, fists clenched. She was shaking, but she stood tall. "No," she said, voice steady. "It's yours." Ewell laughed, cold and broken. He cocked the shotgun. Before anyone could move, Boo Radley, the boy locked away, the ghost in every child's story, pushed himself to his feet. His eyes, usually so soft and frightened, blazed with something new. Resolve. In one staggering movement, Boo threw himself between Scout and the gun. The blast echoed like thunder. For a second, the world held its breath. Boo fell to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The shotgun slipped from Ewell's hands. Silence spread like wildfire through the crowd. Atticus was there in an instant, cradling Boo in his arms. Tears streamed down Scout's face as she dropped to her knees beside them. Sheriff Tate stepped forward, his voice hoarse but firm. "Bob Ewell fell on his own knife," he declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's the truth." No one argued. In Boo's final gasping breath, he smiled at Scout, a soft, sad smile. And then he was gone. Later, much later, Scout would sit on the Radley porch, wrapped in one of Boo's old quilts. She would watch the sun set over a town forever changed. A town that had torn itself apart and was only just beginning to heal. She would remember Boo's sacrifice, how the one they had feared had become their greatest protector. And she would understand, at last, what Atticus had tried to teach her all along. Real courage isn't a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through, no matter what. Boo Radley had been the real Mockingbird all along, and Maycomb, broken and bloodied, would spend a lifetime learning how to sing again.